Picture this. You wake up one day and realise your entire life has been a simulation. The world you thought was real was nothing more than code, and your real body is locked in a pod, suspended in a fluid, surrounded by endless rows of other people in identical pods. All of you are connected to a vast machine network, not as free beings, but as energy sources, batteries for the machines. You're being farmed like livestock, not for meat or milk, but for electricity. That's the terrifying vision at the core of the Matrix universe. It's a brilliant piece of science fiction storytelling. But does this make any sense? Could humans actually function as batteries for the machines? Or is this one of those sci-fi concepts that collapses as soon as you bring out the calculator? In today's episode of The Real Science of Science Fiction, we're going to tackle this question head on. We'll look at human energy production, look at how much power we could realistically supply to the machines, and then compare it to what the machines would actually need. Along the way, we'll explore some fascinating detours into metabolism, thermodynamics, alternative energies, and the psychology of control. By the end, you'll see whether or not the human battery idea is scientifically feasible. We'll start by looking at the basics, how much power a human being generates. We'll look at the forms of energy our bodies produce, and which ones the machines could harvest. We'll apply the laws of thermodynamics to figure out conversion efficiencies. And we'll scale it up. How many humans would it take to power something as big as a machine city, or even the Matrix itself? Let's start small. In the Matrix, the humans are fed in tanks of gel. What energy do we currently get from the food we eat? When you eat a sandwich or a bowl of rice, you're essentially loading your body's fuel tank. That energy is measured in food calories, or more accurately, kilocalories. 1 kilocalorie is equal to 1,000 calories, and that's equal to around 4,184 joules of energy. A typical adult will consume around 2,000 kilocalories a day. So that works out around 8.4 million joules of energy every day. That's how much chemical energy you're putting into your system. Now, let's convert that into power. There are 86,400 seconds in a day. Divide 8.4 million joules by that number, and you get around 97 joules per second, also known as watts. So, an average person, just by existing, is generating about the same amount of energy as a 100-watt light bulb. So, that's our baseline. Around 100 watts of biological power per person. Sometimes more if you're very active, or sometimes less if you're sleeping, for example, but roughly in that ballpark. But remember, we don't just burn food in isolation. Our cells are performing aerobic respiration, combining glucose from the food we eat with oxygen from the air we breathe to release usable energy in the form of ATP. A single glucose molecule holds around 686 kilocalories of energy per mole when fully oxidized with oxygen. In the mitochondria, 1 glucose molecule plus 6 oxygen molecules yields carbon dioxide, water, and a theoretical yield of around 36 ATP molecules. Each ATP stores around 7.3 kilocalories per mole in its phosphate bonds. This is the energy currency our cells actually spend. So, oxygen is just as important in our energy equation as the food is. Without oxygen, humans switch to aerobic metabolism, where glucose is only partially broken down into lactic acid. This produces ATP much less efficiently, only around 2 ATP per glucose instead of 36. That's why you fatigue so quickly if your muscles don't get enough oxygen. In enough energy terms, oxygen acts like a fuel multiplier. It unlocks almost 18 times more usable energy from the same amount of food. That's why humans and almost all higher animals have evolved around aerobic respiration. So, if the Matrix machines were really treating humans as batteries, they'd have to provide not just food calories, but also a constant supply of oxygen. And of course, oxygen isn't free. Generating and recycling breathable oxygen at scale in giant human farms would be its own enormous energy cost. Now, That 100 watts isn't all neat electricity like you get from a plug socket. It comes in several forms. Stored chemical energy in the bonds of glucose and fat. Heat energy, keeping your body at around 37 degrees Celsius. Mechanical energy, moving your muscles. And electrical energy, tiny voltage signals used by the nerves in the brain. The electrical activity in your nerves and brain is fascinating, but it's measured in millivolts and microamps, not nearly enough to power a machine civilization. The mechanical energy of your muscles could in theory be harnessed, like when someone pedals a bike to power a small generator. But if you lock people in pods, they're not going to be exercising much. So really, the only consistently available energy is the waste heat your body produces just by staying alive. And here's where the problems start. To convert that waste heat into electricity, you need a temperature difference. A steam engine, for example, works because steam at hundreds of degrees drives a piston while the outside environment is cooler. The theoretical upper limit on how efficient that process can be is called the Carnot efficiency. It's calculated as 1 minus the ratio of the cold temperature to the hot temperature, measured in Kelvin. For a human body at 37 degrees Celsius, that's around 310 Kelvin. The surrounding environment, let's say that's 20 degrees Celsius, is 293 degrees Kelvin. Plugging those numbers in, we get 1 minus 293 over 310, or 0.05, or around 5%. And that's the absolute best case scenario. Nothing can be more efficient than 5%. In practice, real devices are far less efficient. Thermoelectric generators, small solid-state devices that convert temperature differences into electricity, often get efficiencies of around 2% at these temperature gaps. That means from your 100 watts of body power, you could realistically capture maybe 2 watts of usable electricity. To put that into perspective, 2 watts is enough to run a small LED light. That's all a single person could produce for the machines, after all the losses are taken into account. And we're not done yet, because we still need to factor in the cost of keeping that person alive. For example, the human being doesn't just generate energy, it also consumes it. To keep someone alive in a pod, you have to feed them. Every calorie they burn has to come from the food grown, processed and delivered to it. Agriculture isn't free, it requires sunlight, soil, water, artificial grow lamps, if the machines are farming underground. If the machines are synthesizing nutrients, that takes even more energy. Either way, you're spending more energy to keep the humans alive than you're getting back from them as batteries. It's a negative balance. This is sometimes called an energy return on investment problem. Fossil fuels, for example, give you more energy out than the energy you spend extracting them. But with human batteries, you get far less energy out than you put in. It's a losing strategy. In The Matrix, the films hint at a horrifying workaround, that humans are fed intravenously through nutrient tubes, and that the raw material for this slurry comes, at least in part, from the liquefied remains of other deceased humans. It's a grisly form of recycling where the dead are processed and fed back to the living. From a storytelling standpoint, it's an evocative dystopian image, but scientifically it makes very little sense as an energy system. Recycling humans into other humans doesn't create new energy, it just shifts the same calories around, but with massive energy losses at every stage. Let's have a look. When we metabolize food, we lose energy as heat. When a body is broken down, more energy is lost in the decomposition and processing. When those nutrients are reassembled into feedstock and pumped into another body, there are more conversion losses. Each step of this cycle bleeds energy, which means the system can never break even. It's like trying to keep a light bulb running by wiring it to its own solar panel, which only gets light from the light bulb itself. The physics just doesn't work. For the Matrix machines, this means that unless there's an external energy source feeding into the cycle, something like crops or algae or something far more efficient, the act of recycling humans into humans is a net loss. They'd be better off just feeding humans with the external energy directly. But if they had that resource in the first place, they wouldn't need the humans at all. This paradox highlights how the matrix human battery idea is less about practical bioenergetics and more about a metaphor. It's a narrative device showing us humans reduced to pure commodities, stripped of dignity and literally consumed by the system that enslaves them. So, how many humans would it take to power the matrix? Let's say the machines want the equivalent of a modern power station, or 1 gigawatt. That's 1 billion watts. At 2 watts per person, you'd need 500 million people. At the absolute Carnot maximum of 5 watts per person, you'd still need nearly 200 million people, just to equal a single power plant. And remember, the matrix shows endless cities of machines with enormous power demands. The math doesn't really add up. So why wouldn't the machines just use better energy sources? Solar power, for example, even at current human technology levels. This gives you a roughly 20% efficiency, and the sun delivers around a kilowatt per square metre at the Earth's surface. Geothermal power taps into the Earth's internal heat, which is vast and continuous. Nuclear fission, which we already use, provides huge amounts of energy with no need for human interaction at all. And if the machines are advanced enough to create and sustain the matrix, it's reasonable to assume they might also master nuclear fusion, which will give them near limitless energy. By comparison, using humans is absurdly inefficient. So, maybe we need to look at the idea differently. What if the humans weren't really there to generate electricity at all? What if Neo and the other residents of Zion were wrong, and the machines weren't keeping them as batteries at all? What if they're serving some other function, and the battery explanation is just a simplified metaphor offered to Neo in the film? One possibility is that humans are being used as biological computer processors. Our brains are excellent at pattern recognition and associative thought, areas where machines often struggle. Another idea is psychological. The machines need humanity subdued. Or maybe the pods are just a way of keeping people docile, imprisoned for some other pseudo-scientific storyline. Let's unpack the idea that the humans are really being kept as computer processors. Let's have a look at what the brain is, roughly how powerful it is, how it compares to silicon processors, and why an advanced machine civilization might want human brain processing power. The human brain is an energy-hungry organ, relative to its mass. It runs a massively parallel, highly interconnected network of neurons. A human brain contains on the order of 10 to the 11 neurons, or 100 billion neurons, with an estimated number of total synapses of around 10 to the 15, or 100 trillion neural connections. Brain computation is sparse, event-driven, and massively parallel. Neurons fire at irregular rates, and information is stored and processed sporadically. Huge connectivity, parallel processing, energy efficiency, and lifelong plasticity is what makes biological brains so interesting as computational resource. Let's compare that to the alternative silicon processor that machines might otherwise use in the matrix. There's no single flops number for a brain because the brain doesn't compute in floating point operations per second, the way a computer's CPU does. But scientists have tried to provide rough estimates, so we can do a comparison. Back of the envelope, the brain's computational equivalent commonly ranges from 10 to the 13 to 10 to the 18 operations per second, depending on how you count it. A different way to think about it is energy per operation. We know the brain uses around 20 watts, or 20 joules per second. And if we take a middle estimate of those flops, that's around 10 to the 14 synaptic events per second. Then each synaptic event uses around 2 times 10 to the minus 13 joules, or 0.2 picojoules. For comparison, modern silicon switching energies are often quoted in femtojoules or picojoules per operation, depending on the technology and precision. So the two processes are roughly in the same ballpark, depending on assumptions. Bottom line, the brain is extremely energy efficient for the kind of general purpose, pattern-rich computation it does. In several benchmarks for things like pattern recognition, human brains match or exceed silicon processors in energy per task terms. So, if you're a machine civilization in the Matrix, why would you use organic human brains? Possibly it's for the energy efficiency for certain computations. For massively parallel, associative, low-precision tasks like pattern recognition, human brains are still phenomenally efficient. They do a kind of approximate, robust computation that hardware only very recently began to replicate with brand new specialized neuromorphic chips. Maybe innate architectures for learning and generalization. Brains are the product of evolution and individual learning. They store millions of years of evolved priors, plus a lifetime of experience. For tasks requiring real-world common sense, analogical reasoning or embodied intuition, tapping a biological substrate would give machines capabilities that are expensive to emulate from scratch with silicon processors. Maybe continual learning and plasticity. Human brains learn continuously with a low energy overhead. Training large silicon-based neural nets requires massive batches, datasets, and energy. Biological networks adapt online in a way that is still hard to match. Or maybe specific models. If the machines wanted not just raw computation, but experience-based models that include subjective, embodied knowledge, how it feels to move through a three-dimensional world, for example. Brains have assets that silicon processors lack. However, even if human brains have advantages, and the machines in the Matrix use them not as batteries but as processors, harvesting them at scale isn't trivial. There are roughly 5 problems with this approach. 1. Interfacing bandwidth. Reading from and writing to a brain at full fidelity requires huge data bandwidth. Current non-invasive brain-computer interfaces offer extremely limited channels of bits per second. Scaling that to full brain-to-machine read-write would require breakthroughs in electrophysiology, nanotechnology, or some hypothetical brain-level interface that operates orders of magnitude beyond today's technology. Problem number 2, noise and encoding mismatch. Brains use spikes, chemical modulators, and analog signals. Converting those into digital, machine-friendly representation is lossy and complex. 3. Individual variability. Each brain is wired slightly differently. Machines would need massive calibration, adaptive readout algorithms, or the willingness to accept noisy, individual-specific computation. 4. Maintenance and lifetime. Living brain tissue degrades. Keeping millions of brains healthy, oxygenated, and connected is an engineering feat and carries a metabolic cost. Oxygen, nutrients, waste heat removal, for example. And last but not least, problem number 5, parallelization, overheads. Machines are excellent at scaling silicon clusters. Adding biological nodes complicates orchestration. Synchronizing many brains would be a hard systems problem. So, let's put all the science together. If the machines gained something they couldn't easily obtain with silicon processors, then preserving human brains as computational substrates starts to make sense as a strategic choice, even if expensive. It's a very different justification than we're farming them for electricity. It fits better with a plot in which machines still need something essentially organic to complete their intelligence. The Matrix's horror isn't just inefficient engineering. It's a chilling recognition that humans, for all our biological messiness, encapsulate forms of cognition that might remain valuable even to super-intelligent machines. From a narrative point of view, the human battery idea works brilliantly. It's a visceral image, people reduced to nothing more than power sources, their individuality erased, their potential wasted. It resonates with the feeling of being trapped in a system that drains you for its own benefit. That's why audiences remember it. It's less about physics and more about the metaphor, the sense that society, corporations, or technology can turn us into resources rather than people. So could humans actually serve as practical batteries for machines? The answer is an almost definite no. We produce about 100 watts, and you can maybe extract 2 watts of electricity from that. You'd need hundreds of millions of people just to match a single power plant, and you'd have to spend even more energy to keep those people alive. It's horribly inefficient. As computer processors, maybe. It certainly makes more sense than batteries. As a metaphor, as a symbol of exploitation and control, it's perfect. It's part of what makes The Matrix one of the more memorable sci-fi stories of the past 50 years. If you enjoyed this breakdown of the real science of The Matrix, hit like, subscribe, and let me know what other sci-fi ideas you'd like me to investigate. Until next time.